Welcome back to episode 4 of the Rhetoric Reviewed. Today we're going to be discussing something related to the last video, but again, building off of that. So if you haven't tracked out the last three videos, it is very useful to help understand some of the concepts I'll be using here, and they'll be linked on the channel page. So today, I'll start with the introduction, and of course, as always, we're going to go through 5 different progressions of thought, and then end with the most applicable or something related to the modern day. So, introduction for the topic, order versus truth. Has science come too far? So that's a loaded question. It's been, debated a lot, and the question about whether science is necessary, whether it's good, whether religion is more necessary has been, a fraught issue as both sides have things that they want to say. And here we're going to be discussing kind of what makes each side compelling and what the current situation is. So there's currently two different parties in society: the scientific-based fundamentalists who fundamentally believe in the scriptures of science, which it would be the procedural methods of, for example, the scientific method, observation. They believe in evidence, and the group of the religious fundamentalists. Doesn't really matter where you come from or what religion, but the people who believe in more faith-based ideology. So neither of these are superior to another. They're simply different, at least when you look at it sociologically, anthropologically, whatever. So just because, for example, many people say faith doesn't have evidence doesn't necessarily mean it's worse. So recently, as far as I can remember, these two were on the way out of falling out, right? Like people couldn't reasonably be equally invested in both to its fullest extent. And this was at into the late 20th century, when at least in America religiosity was still relatively high, and people enjoyed the fruits of religion as well as the fruits of science, as improved quality of life, technology, healthcare, medicine, mortality rates, all of these things, right? Science has had undeniable good, and both fulfill ultimately a certain need in humans. So the function that these two serve is a belief structure. So what does that mean? What's a belief structure? Why is it important to humans? And we'll get into that. So humans, as many of you know, and if you look around yourself, aren't very powerful creatures. We're not strong. We don't have scales. We don't have crazy muscles. Nor do we have crazy speed, right? So one of our only evolutionary attributes historically has been our communicative ability and our strength in numbers and communication and organization. That, yes, sure, hyenas might work in packs, but not at the levels that humans can. And there's a book that talks about this, and I'll get into it. But ultimately, what we found out is that the reason why humans were able to congregate in like huge groups, not as much maybe in the scale of ants, but in early humanity, we were able to congregate into groups via a shared story, which is religion. So while it might be difficult for people to know each other personally, past 150 people, which is the number that people, the generally accepted number for the limit of a human population that works together, people are able to unite themselves under a certain belief. So I might not know John, who lives in Germany, but if we both serve the same God, we have the same connection, which allows us to work together despite our differences and despite the fact that we don't work with each other. So throughout history, religion has been the norm, and a tool, a trait evolved by humans, has been useful and kept us alive for this amount of time. So this doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to need a god figure, right? Or a certain, pantheon of gods like the Greeks or Romans. You're going to need some sort of belief structure and fundamental idea that you can subscribe yourself to that allows you to become a part of a larger community. So that's the power of religion and ideology when it comes to influencing society. So the book I would recommend is called *Sapiens*, which is by Yuval Noah Harari. And there's a few other books about from him that are extremely relevant to today's date and has taught me a lot personally. So it basically tries to have a more sophisticated view on the way modern society was created and the factors that go into it. So it says here, money, imperialism, and religion are the forces that unify humankind into a global society. So obviously, check this book out by all means if you want to learn more. But the main point that I'm trying to illustrate here is that you need a belief structure for a human society to evolve, prosper, and continue to function. And that gets into what is science. So science, to a lot of us, means a lot of things. There's the science, the noun, which is when you say, trust the science, which is the general idea of science, the idea of evidence. There's scientific disciplines, biology, zoology, physics, right? All of these things that contribute to the science umbrella. But science isn't really a method or structure. It ultimately comes down to being an alternate belief ideology. And Sapiens, the book, talks about this for sure. And essentially what science is, it's a belief structure based around empirical evidence and procedure. Why is that? So let's go back to the history of science a little bit. So science, at least in the modern understanding, has to do with the scientific method, which means you observe something, you make a reasonable analysis out of that, then you combine evidence through multiple trials, and then you end up with a theory or a theory, which is able to sort of ascertain some sort of understanding about the world. And that's how science has been impactful for society in the last 400, 500, 600 years, right? It's been able to innovate, and it's been able to fix its own issues, and it's been able to create huge, important inventions that have undoubtedly saved millions of lives, right? I'm not saying that science is not good. We'll get into more about the problems with science as an ideology, but science, the technological thing, has been extremely useful for human society. So I mentioned earlier that science self-corrects. When we get something wrong, we go back and fix it through empirical evidence, observations, and analysis. So what's an example of when we were incorrect? So let's think back to 150 years, just back to the early 20th century, when race science was a thing. This time, usually white nationalists, white supremacists, you might say, or even, all around the world, people believe that race was an inborn trait, that race mattered, and that it had huge impacts on the way people behaved, their tendencies, just not anything that could help you build a narrative. While, we do decry the people in the imperial stages being very racist and having these thoughts, it is true that they did genuinely believe that this was a science. That, for example, in slave societies, that they believed that the slaves were inferior because they were slaves. This is even going back to ancient Greek times. I forget, was it Aristotle who said it, but said that the slaves were of slave blood and therefore they must be slaves. This is obviously incorrect and it's been proving wrong. Although genetics does have an impact on who you are, it's not racial at the same rates that they would say. So this is evidence of us going back and fixing an issue we made with science, and that's what makes science such a powerful ideology. It's able to correct itself and make progresses and strides in the product of its institution. However, this is, again, we've discussed many times how, especially with the first video, how a strength, when taken to its logical endpoint, can often become a negative. So how does this manifest in science? So this would manifest by lowering trust in the institution. Because it's so skeptical of itself, because science always has to look inwards, and because science is, as an ideology, is functionally a, not self-loathing, but it has to have certain doubts about its own beliefs, it's a low trust system. And this makes it difficult to actually rally people around something, and it doesn't generate order because there's always doubt on whether or not the present is true, and there's no true authority to science because it can always change. Even things we take as granted for now, or even 100 years ago, like we thought that Newtonian physics, where F equals ma, all these nice things were the everything. We thought that defined everything in the universe, and then Albert Einstein came around and upended the tables. Throughout history, time and time again, you see examples where science has progressed. It's built upon itself to change things for the world. And again, this is a strength, yes, but it's also a weakness because of its self-correcting mechanisms, and because it's based on empirical evidence and observation, you're gonna have a low trust system because people don't trust the results of it as much as they would an immutable source. Because science always says science is based on humility, right? We don't know what's out there, so we gotta go and find it. And that what we don't know is, of course, noble and humble and great for science and all of this, but it's not commanding. It doesn't have the same authority as a religious figure who says there's a god up there who says do this, or there's gods up there maybe who says do this and do that. And that's why ultimately science is an ideology. It's an ideology, it's a worship of the tenets of the scientific method. So the scientific method is, of course, at the end of the day, a procedure and a process. But the adherence to the scientific method, the belief that everything for us to believe should be tested by the scientific method. That reasonability comes from this is what makes science an ideology. That if something doesn't have evidence, you're not going to believe it because it doesn't actually abide by the tenets of the religion you believe in or the ideology you believe in, which is the science. So when you see people say, trust the science, or, oh, the science doesn't support what you say, that is the same, almost the same thing as saying, oh, the Bible doesn't support this, or the Quran doesn't, or the Torah doesn't support this. It's all saying essentially the same thing, except because the way we are brought up, especially in secular society and our public schooling system, you're led to believe that science is the all-in-one. It's like the basis. It's the basis of what forms society. However, if you look at it like the way I'm looking at it here and breaking it down from a more macro level, science is nothing special. It's just, instead of believing in faith and believing in something that you don't know is out there, it's more focused on finding out what's out there and being mistrustful of, well, not mistrustful, but inquisitive about the natural world. So this leads into the main debate of this video, which is faith versus procedure. I'll go back to that visual I just showed in a second, but ultimately, the current battle that I'm trying to, order as truth comes down to faith versus procedure. So what is faith? Faith can be defined easily. Of course, there's dictionary definitions, but belief in something without needing evidence, or belief wholeheartedly in a system that brings you some sort of benefit, whether that's real world material, or it's spiritual, or it's just for sound of mind. Faith is something, a belief in a higher power that allows you to have this sort of security. On the other hand, procedure is a belief that you need to continue to uncover the truth. That way you're able to reach the truth, which is a different concept, which is hard to get into, but the truth would be an all-encompassing knowledge of all that exists for the purpose of nothing else but such. So progress for progress's sake, truth for truth's sake, science and research for research's sake. There doesn't always need to be a purpose for doing certain research, right? So these are two different separate worldview assumptions. One requires empirical evidence and observations to make a conclusion about something, and the other does not. The other is more based on creating order out of authority, based on some higher power, which may or may not be human created. I'm not saying, I don't know, but draws on a higher power to make decisions and standards for the world. So that's what it comes down to. It's not only about evidence-based and not evidence-based. It's down to faith versus procedure. Science demands procedure, and religion expounds faith. And these two things cannot exist at equal rates without contradicting each other. So we have this diagram here, which shows how both of these I selected the trapezoid shape because they're like foundations. How procedure is going to let you uncover truth, while faith lets you uncover order. So what's the significance of this, right? Well, let's discuss this first. Why can't these be applied against each other? So let's imagine you have a question of faith, and you want to try to apply procedure towards it. By all means, there is no, concrete empirical proof of a higher power. It's all speculative, if at all, if you want to approach it in a scientific manner. But that itself is wrong. You cannot expect there to be proof for faith, because faith itself is the fundamental which religion is based on. So you can't say that you can't demand empirical evidence for certain events in the Bible, or again, all the different world books of religion. But I'm just using the Bible as an example here because it's very familiar to most people. But when you try to apply procedure to faith, what happens is that you end up undermining faith itself. Faith is based on an unquestioning, or at least a full wholehearted faith or belief in a certain power, in a certain authority, in a certain morality. And by trying to apply procedure and break down what makes it work, it's antithetical to the whole purpose of religion. You want to bring people together. You want them to listen to certain things so that they can be good for themselves and also to society. But by applying procedure, you're going to break that down. You're going to break down the trust you have in the authority. As we said earlier, science is all about the self-correcting mechanism, right? And that makes it low trust because, you're always self-correcting. Things are changing. People are leaving the scene. But with faith, that's not the case. Well, there are changes at a more macro scale. Everyday wise, things don't change easily, and that's what makes it powerful. So that's why procedure can't be applied to faith. On the other hand, you have faith into procedure. So procedure, or the sciences, is all about getting things right, finding out things, finding out, why do we get sick, for example, through a strict set of methods and observations and experiments that let us define more things about truth, and we can't make any conclusions without this sort of empirical evidence, and that's what makes a hypothesis into a theory. Nothing can, of course, be confirmed, but if we have a question and we have enough evidence to maybe answer it, that's good enough for science. However, if you go into this using faith, you're gonna have the opposite. You're gonna have the opposite thing, right? If you go in, for example, trying to discover the secrets of the universe, right, and you want to, or at least the solar system, and let's say you want to find out, and you're in 1500s, and you find out whether or not the Earth goes around the sun or the sun goes around the Earth, and that's a very procedural thing, right? You could definitely do it with math and the mapping the stars. I'm not really sure how that works. However, it's been done. But if you were to approach it with faith rather than the maths and the sciences and the observations and the telescopes and all of that, you're going to find that you're just going to ignore so many of these steps because you need to have it aligning with the faith. You need to align the procedural, liberal, the more freedom, the more truth-based procedure will be infected by the faith, which wants everything to align with an authority. And that's not bad either, but it's just what happens when two different world ideologies mix. And because this is inherent in every system with both procedure and faith, religion and science, truth and order, you're going to find that this isn't a tenable solution, that there needs to be something else, that either one needs to bow to the other in the end of the day for cohesiveness to finally be achieved. Again, I think the best example of this is when people say, along with myself, but, sort of meta-analysis, when, oh, I don't believe in religion because, there's no evidence for God. If there's evidence for God, I'll believe in it. But that's approaching it the completely wrong way. That's showing, you by saying that, are showing that you believe more in the fundamentals of procedure because you demand evidence for everything rather than faith, where you demand evidence where you don't demand evidence, you believe wholeheartedly in an authority, which might be a higher power, without question. Or even if you do have questions, it doesn't deter you from not believing, from believing in this higher power. And this gets into the issue of order versus truth. So there's order and there's truth. Well, I guess I don't know how to put it, but of course these two can coincide. Truth can come to order, right? For example, if truth about some sort of issue that was causing civil dispute gets revealed, that might cause more order. But there's ultimately a fundamental difference between the two things, because you have order, which is based on authority, and truth, which is based often not on authority, but based on belief of a higher power. A higher power is the truth, what's actually out there. And these two are different because human order, again, has been historically characterized by religion, which has a higher authority, and the pursuit of truth in these societies was to discover more about people and the religion itself. On the other hand, science, or the science as an ideology at least, has today, at least the very fact of making this video shows that we're having religion as a scientific topic, and we're trying to delve into the religions, the questions of science, religion and how it works, and these two don't mesh very well. And this leads into a broader point about ideology and how it fulfills that initial purpose I talked about. So I talked a lot about how science isn't really, the same power as, the same authority as religion, but ultimately, again, as I said, these are both ideologies that fulfill the human need for a higher power or authority system. And order versus truth is the issue, where religion prioritizes order at the expense of truth, and science prioritizes truth at the expense of order. But what's more expensive, truth or order? By far, it's easier to get rid of truth for order. While truth, of course, in the justice system kind of thing, does matter, truth when it comes to what's out there, what each star means very little when it comes to actually keeping human society cohesive. Because when human society is not cohesive, you have more crime, more inequality, more hate in general, and the recipes for revolution. So sometimes you need to sacrifice truth for order, and sometimes you need to sacrifice order for truth. For example, if someone in the government's doing some huge scheme that's just extremely negative, you need to sacrifice that in order for truth to prevail, because the truth is that the order is not actually orderful, it's draining on the citizenry. And ideologies like scientific secular ideologies, which includes things like communism, Nazism, Stalinism, science, even liberalism, all of these things are bigger than religion right now. And that's very easy to say. Well, many people do say they're religious. How many people wholeheartedly believe in a God and don't care about the sciences? We don't care if there's no proof for God, that there is a God out there, and they believe in him dearly, and that religion prevails. How many people are actually like that? Much less than the pre-modern era. I can tell you that for sure. And a key difference I do want to note here, something that I think that's interesting, is that the difference between ideology and religion is that religion never promises utopia, only after death. Right? Religion never promises that your real world is going to be solved or it's easier somehow. It's more of a code of ways to live, to interact with others, to hold yourself to certain standards, and to believe and feel a connection with this higher power. That's more of what religion is about. It's more about how you apply yourselves in the real world. As on the other hand, as secular ideologies like Stalinism, Nazism, as liberalism, these all promise to fix your problems via with liberalism, it's equality. With Nazism, it's the Lebensraum and the great arrival of the Aryan race. With Stalinism, it's communism, how it's going to fix everything by getting rid of the bourgeoisie. These ideologies promise to create utopia. And on the other hand, religion does not, or traditional religion does not. It's a bit of a tangent, but it's an interesting distinction that I wanted to make. And this leads into my more modern point, which is about the 4 religious progressions and how this might apply into someone's real life context. For me, my story was I grew up Catholic, and then I got out of Catholicism because, of course, science, and you need a God you need a God there, or you need evidence for a God there. And I grew up with that, and I can fully well see that I fell into this trap of I am a procedural-based person, or at least fundamentally the way I grew up is, and that's what I believe in more than a authority-based religion. And there's 4 progressions to this, as we'll get into right now. Compliance, which is when you're a kid, or if you're born in an extremely set together society like the Amish or more orthodox societies. That's number 1, compliance. You don't question anything, you just kind of take things for granted a little bit, right? And you assume things are the way they are, and you don't give it much thought. That's stage 1. Stage 2 is rejection. That's where I was. Rejection is where you believe that religion is not necessary because it's not true, because you are a proceduralist. You're a science-based fundamentalist. You fundamentally believe in the scientific method and its tenets. So that's rejection, because you don't think religion is useful because it's not empirical, it's not observation-based, it's not evidence-based. That's the second stage. That's where many people, I believe, in current society are. Stage 3 is condonation. So this comes from the word condone, which means to not exactly approve of, but to allow to happen. This means that you're still in the rejection phase, as you don't believe in a higher authority because you can't bring yourself to do so. And this is, I guess, a more higher level of understanding. And maybe this video, can convince you to be a condonationist or to enter the stage. But this means that you acknowledge, at the very least, the utility of religion. You don't call religion evil for having all these wars in history, which they were, much less than the secular wars of religion, which is like the, Stalinism, Maoism, Nazism. Anyways, this is where you believe that religion is extremely useful for society. It's necessary for society, and it's not a drain on society, as many people might say. It's useful, done. And the final stage you have, which you might see in people in the real world, is the return. This is extremely rare. This is despite going through the previous 2 or previous 3 processes where, you don't believe in religion anymore because, you need evidence. And then you begrudgingly say, there's no evidence, but religion is still good. And then you have to come back that despite all of that journey, despite all of that learning, despite all of that rejection, you come back to wholeheartedly believing in the higher authority. So ultimately, it's a cycle. Or like a cycle. You can always come back to compliance. The return's a bit different from compliance because you've already experienced the different 3 stages of what might happen and the questioning necessary. And this is, I believe, what a lot of religions preach, that you should question, you should go through this process, and you should return after you understood that ultimately, yes, this is what makes religion important and powerful. So to summarize, we went through the beginnings of science, the origins of science, and a meta-analysis on what science means. So we discovered that science isn't just a procedure that is on top of everything else. Science itself is an ideology that lets you think in a certain way. And what is that certain way? That's procedural thinking. You need empirical evidence for you to believe something wholeheartedly, right? And that's adverse to faith, where you don't need evidence to believe in something wholeheartedly. You're expected to do so because of the benefits it confers you in this life and the next, often, at least the ones with the afterlife, for no apparent reason. And finally, well, second to last, we go through order versus truth, that these different ideologies play into order and truth, and each of them have to make sacrifices to make the best for their societies. And finally, the 4 religious progressions, which is what people might go through in the real world, which is all based on going through and learning stuff about this, which is the religious journey that many people take. So, what do we do about this? Clearly, there's a lot of issues going on in society, and a lot of them are caused by lack of religiosity, as many people say, or, some people might say the lack of procedure. We haven't done enough scientifically. And there's no real answer, like a lot of the questions I pose on this channel. But what it does seem to favor is the idea that there needs to be an overcorrection. We need to choose order or truth at a certain level and a certain depth. For a lot of people, knowing that the universe is out there and that we're just a speck is really discouraging. It makes you feel worthless. And who knows to what degree that's affected the minds of people in the 21st century. So maybe truth isn't as important when it's about a galaxy far, far away, right? Maybe truth isn't as important. And order is more important, that keeping the minds of people healthy at the expense of knowing what's out there is a good thing. On the other hand, if there's mass corruption in the government that's, hurting the people because people are stealing money and embezzlement and stuff, maybe it's important that truth prevails at the expense of order. Yeah, people will be unhappy, but their taxpayer money will probably go somewhere more useful. And this issue highlights the main question of the topic, order versus truth. Has science come too far? So as always, if you have any questions, criticism, comments, or any critiques on anything I've said here, or you want to discuss it more, please leave it in the comment section below. I've really been appreciating the support, and we'll be back either tomorrow or next week with another video. Thank you.